Hello everyone, it's George from Ireland. Here I am in Tbilisi, the capital of the Republic of Georgia, on Rustaveli Avenue, one of the main streets. So it's a bit of a walk through Georgian history. There you can see the Treasury Museum across the street, which I might take a look at later on. Some bookstores, rather bereft of books, but it's fairly early in morning, which is why not a lot of people are here. Now it's a pity that there's this park in the city centre and you can't go into it. It's guarded by some ferocious hounds. Garden of the First Republic of Georgia is called, because obviously Georgia's part of the Russian Empire for about a century up until 1918, and then there was the October Revolution in Russia, and the Bolsheviks seized power, and they said that any of the non-Russian peoples who wished to proclaim independence would be permitted to do so. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin became chairman of the the Council of People's Commissars, effectively Prime Minister. He said he hoped that the ethnic minorities like the Georgians, Kazakhs, Finns and so forth would remain in a voluntary and honourable union, as he put it, but if they wished to declare independence, that their wish would be respected. But anyway, the Georgians lost little time in doing so. So the October Revolution, it's 7th of November, according to our Gregorian calendar, and as you can see here, in May 1918, the Georgian Democratic Republic was proclaimed. So Georgians wanted independence, but there's a large minority of people in Georgia who were not ethnically Georgian, and Tbilisi was an ethnically, mostly Armenian city. Then there are obviously indigenous ethnic minorities, Mingrelians, Ossetians, Abkhazians and so forth, and people lived mingled together. Obviously there's a large number of Russians living down here, there's some Azerbaijanis and so forth. Anyway, so independence it was, and they were fairly successful at that, but obviously there was chaos because the First World War was just ending. You see this with their old Parliament building. So some Georgians joined the Ottoman army in the First World War, the so-called Georgian Legion, because the Ottomans said, well, if we win the war, we will grant independence to Georgia. Meanwhile, the Armenian genocide was going on. But anyway, the two sides managed to get together. Those who've been on the Russian side, those who've been on the Ottoman side in the First World War. Of course, because the Ottoman Empire was so close, Georgia borders Turkey, that was relevant. Germany is very far away. Anyway, there were some prominent Bolsheviks who are from here, not least Yosif Vissarionovich Djugashvili, better known as Stalin, and Sergo Orjonikidze, and eventually Lavrenti Beria, but he actually started out in Azerbaijan, belonged to the Musavat party. So I was going to say that across the road, I just found this out yesterday from our guide, that's where Edvard Shevardnadze used to live, and he was president of Georgia from about 1994 till about 2004. The Rose Revolution forced him out, and he was the Soviet foreign minister in the late 1980s. His granddaughter, she was a presenter for RT, as in Russia Today, and our guide told us that his surname Shevardnadze, the Shevardnad, is derived from this Georgian word for falcon. Anyway, he died just a few years ago, a Soviet old-timer. Okay, so then in 1921, the Russian Civil War was coming to an end, and the Bolsheviks decided to invade Georgia. They're going to make it part of their new Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, because the Soviet Union as such didn't exist till 1922. It's December 1922, it was proclaimed on the stage of the Bolshoi Theatre. And initially they created the Transcaucasian Soviet Socialist Republic, which was Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia together. So in about 1936 they separated the three, and Stalin drew the boundaries to try and make the dissolution of the Soviet Union impossible by mixing people together. By the way, this is Government House, which is their parliament, and then you can see up there in the middle, I wish I could zoom in from here, with my finger above there, where they used to have the hammer and sickle in Soviet times, which has been removed, and you can just about see the outline of the hammer and sickle. You can see ears of corn, there's a cornucopia around that. So that was built in 1936 there, on the site of a former Alexander Nevsky Russian Orthodox church. So yeah, the Bolsheviks invaded, they defeated independent Georgia. Those who weren't executed when they surrendered were sent to slave labor in Siberia. Very few of them survived. So Stalin, despite being Georgian, was not kind to his own ethnic group, and the Georgian Orthodox Church was almost entirely shut down, and that was the real repository of the Georgian language and Georgian culture. Obviously, Russian became the prestige language; everyone had to learn that. You could learn Georgian in schools as well, but the better ones tended to learn Russian, and obviously had much greater opportunities if you mastered the Russian tongue. But they did spread literacy, so it was incredibly violently oppressive Bolshevik rule, and now they call it as a Soviet occupation, overlooking the uncomfortable fact that there were some Georgians who were, well, at the very top of the whole Soviet system and very much in favour of belonging to the Soviet Union, saying that the idea of independence was bourgeois nationalism, and that the Bolsheviks were going to liberate the proletariat and the peasantry. What else about Rustaveli Avenue? Well, Stalin died in 1953, and then a few years later, well, there was the so-called secret speech in 1956, just over 3 years after Stalin died. Nikita Khrushchev, by then, was the Supremo, as in General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It's a very long-winded title, so just General Secretary for short. He's not President, not Prime Minister. But anyway, he gave a speech in which he denounced the wrongdoings of Stalin, put all the blame on him. That's a school over there, by the way. I wonder it was a very illustrious one to be so central. I saw the children coming out there yesterday afternoon. And some Bolsheviks, not Bolsheviks, Georgians were affronted by this because they had great national pride that one of their own had risen to the top of the tree. And they said that Khrushchev had made sarcastic remarks about him. So there was a big demonstration here, the 9th of April demonstration, and the Soviet police and army surrounded it, and they opened fire. About 22 people were killed. That is in March 1956. So it's commemorated by a plaque which I'm about to show you. There's also the 9th of April incident, 1989, which happened on this same street, and again in which the police shot dead about 22 unarmed demonstrators. So, where is the plaque? Actually, it's better if I show you from this angle here. You see the plaque above my head saying, "Here, the Soviet police." The monument commemorates the participants of a peaceful rally gunned down by the Soviet regime on March 9th, 1956. Okay, and so we go on down Rustaveli Avenue. So there have been a lot of reforms in the 1980s in the Soviet Union. Perestroika, as in restructuring. People allowed free speech. Other political parties were unbanned. And then nationalist movements started in the various Union republics, demanding independence, and Georgia was no exception. So, and there was a demonstration here in 1989, and the police didn't know how to handle public meetings, and their response was just to use violence. But nobody could possibly say anything remotely critical of the government. No one can be independent-minded, and if they do, they chant something or hold a placard, "We're going to kill them." So they did, and that's the 9th of April instead of 1989. But the whole situation unravelled, and Georgia declared its independence towards the end of 1991, just after that failed August coup, a last-ditch attempt by communist reactionaries to oust Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev and maintain the Soviet system, both communism and the unity of the USSR. But they failed, and it really backfired because it triggered a wave of declarations of independence. Up at that point, yes, the Baltic republics wanted to go independent, but it was far from clear that the others were. And I remember people saying that, okay, although communism will go, the Soviet Union will largely remain together. The Baltics are an exception, but certainly Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, they will stay together. And indeed, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who was the first secretary of the Kazakh Communist Party, effectively ruler of Kazakhstan, he campaigned against independence from Kazakhstan, but eventually led his country to independence. All right, so Zviad Gamsakhurdia was a renowned dissident writer who was in prison in the 1970s for anti-Soviet agitation, and conditions in prison were very harsh indeed. So he was a very gallant campaigner for his cause, because you got everything from the state, and if you fell out with the authorities, that was a real headache to get a place to live, to get enough food, access to medical treatment, anything. And of course he had no idea that in 1991 Georgia would become independent again, and it happened. There was a Georgian government in exile all this time. Some of them fled in 1921, and indeed the parents of Salome Zurabashvili, the president of Georgia, they were amongst those who fled. via Turkey, eventually to France, with a significant Georgian community that was kept going. Anyway, so Zviad Sakhurdia became president, the first president of modern Georgia. The civil war broke out, Russia backed the other side, and eventually Edvard Shevardnadze came back, someone who'd been an old communist old-timer. Zviad Sakhurdia died in mysterious circumstances. Did he commit suicide, or was he murdered? Anyway, he's buried in their hero cemetery, halfway up the mountain there. And Abkhazia and South Ossetia broke away, of course, with Russia's help. So he ruled on Shevardnadze to 2004 with massive demonstrations. The bloodless Rose Revolution toppled him, and Mikhail Saakashvili came to office. Saakashvili had reached out at her just as the Soviet Union was breaking up. He'd gone to university in Kiev, surprisingly, where he learned Ukrainian. Now, there's no need to, because it was all taught in Russian. He later married a Dutch woman. He's a master of several languages, including English. And he came back, really oriented towards the country towards the west, and he rooted out corruption, which was endemic up until that point, and a defalcation, increased police's salary tenfold, because the police were just notorious at this point for shaking people down, because the salaries were just unlivable. Such a paltry pay packet that they considered it their right to extort bribes, even done nothing wrong, because anyway to survive. So he did improve things a lot. He even sent Georgian troops to help the United States in Iraq. But anyway, he was ousted some years later. It was that 2008 war where Russia invaded, which just went on for about 5 days. But of course, as though they would start a war, the Georgians were outnumbered about 50 to 1. So anyway, he's overthrown. I can't remember the new guys, Irakli, Gubashvili. Irakli is actually derived from Heracles, or Heraklion, you know, the Greek name. Anyway, so I hope you're learning a little bit about Georgia and seeing these Tsarist era buildings, just a few stories high, because before they had lifts. They look so very fine, I think you'll agree. And look at this one. Is this arabesque? Sort of Ottoman style? It's almost the kind of thing you'd see in Spain or something, or North Africa. Alright, so that's enough from Rustaveli Avenue. I could go on. It's kind of annoying and noisy with all these, with all the traffic going by. Yeah, I'll just show you some of the sort of souvenirs they're selling here. Right, so socks, slippers, dolls, Georgian flag, Orthodox images, horns, drinking horns, stuff like that. These plates, pipes, national dress, t-shirts, baseball caps. That's enough. Okay, so thank you for watching. Please subscribe on Patreon, donate on PayPal. Goodbye from Tbilisi, everyone, and toodaloo.